This is Corinne.
And this is Ayani.
And you're listening to Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast where we take a semi-scholarly look at why
and how
the sex stuff in media matters.
This episode continues our deep dive into the sexy and sex-filled Korean web drama Hit the Spot.
In part 2 of our discussion, we get into the ways that the drama centers female pleasure, how it balances education with fantasy, and ask if consent can really be sexy. Spoiler, yes.
If you like what you hear, make sure to tell all your friends about us and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us with podcast discoverability.
And come find us on Twitter and Instagram at SexLoveLit.
Our DMs are open.
All right, on with the show.
Why did I say that like that?
So weird. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to SLL. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of our deep dive into the Korean web drama Hit the Spot. Before we jump right into it, though, we're going to do a lightning round of What's Sparking Joy. So, Ayani, what is What's Sparking Joy?
Oh, you're making me do it. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I am. If I open the episode, you have to introduce What's Sparking Joy.
Sure. No, that's fair. That's fair. So What's Sparking Joy is a little moment in which we talk about a piece of media, movie, television show, book, music, etc. that is bringing a little joy to our lives. It is a fun way for us to expand beyond the topic of our episode and just, give some color to our existence. So we're actually going to do a little bit of a rapid round of What's Sparking Joy, since we're assuming you're kind of coming straight off of our first Hit the Spot episode. So we are going to share a song that is giving us joy that pops up on our joint Spotify playlist, because we're dorks and have a joint Spotify playlist.
Most of it, this isn't a spoiler anyway. Most of us, that's
spoiler
not possible.
For our playlist.
Spoiler for our playlist. Most of our playlist is not in English. And, if it is in English, we're, upset with ourselves.
Yeah, unless it's, a banger. But, yeah, there's a lot of, there's a lot of Japanese, there's a lot of Korean, and now there's also a lot of Mandarin. So some of the playlists, because, Spotify makes playlists for you. And I think I looked yesterday, and for me and my genre mixes, I had J-pop, K-pop, and Mando pop mixed in with R&B and jazz, and I was like, all right.
Mine are K-pop, Mando pop, and then Moody playlist.
Oh, Moody is on there too. Moody is on there. Well, now I know we said this was going to be quick, but now I'm curious. Corinne, what are your playlists right now? Your Spotify genre playlists.
Let me look. Your top mixes.
Oh, I look at Made for You.
Oh,
so my genre mixes right now are Afrobeats mix, K-pop mix, house mix, Mando pop mix, dance electronic mix, and pop mix. Interesting.
So mine is romantic mix, moody mix, Blackpink mix, something in Mandarin that I can't read mix, and then they go into K-pop mix and then Mando pop mix.
Interesting. Oh, you're looking at the whole mix. Yeah, so because there's mood mixes, decade mixes, artist mixes, and genre mixes. I also have, I think I just saw, I have chill, happy, moody, and romantic, which I guess 5.
Oh, under Made for Corinne, I just have mix 1, mix 2, mix. I mean, this is. I think I'm difficult for Spotify to pin down because I'm always listening to the soundtrack of whatever I'm watching right now. And then I have a couple other playlists that I'll listen to. But right now, the majority of my listening is the soundtrack from Summer Strike, a K-drama I finished in December, The Interest of Love, and Under the Queen's Umbrella.
So that makes a lot of sense, because the song that I was going to pick from our mix that I heard for the first time yesterday, but that was really delightful, is Hello Stranger, which is from the Summer Strike soundtrack. And it was really chill. It caught me off guard. I hadn't heard it before, but I was humming it by the time it was over. So that's my pick for What's Sparking Joy musically for me.
So then my pick for What's Sparking Joy is Ditto by New Jeans. So New Jeans is a South Korean K-pop girl group, and I think Ayani listens to more of New Jeans than I do, but I really like Ditto, and that has been on repeat for me, and also repeat for my upstairs neighbor who got new speakers that he plays very loudly.
Oh, hey, he also likes New Jeans. Okay, he's got taste. My favorite one is Attention. I like that one a lot. That was on the K-pop on playlist. I was like,
Mm.
mine now. Thank you. So yeah, that was a very short round of What's Sparking Joy, but you've learned more about us than perhaps you wanted to know in this moment.
Yeah, but all right. Shifting then back into Hit the Spot. So if you didn't listen to
Yes.
our first episode, you can check that out for a summary and a situating of the show, the main actors, the characters. We did a lot of sort of like narrative analysis in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
And this episode, we're going to, I think, put our academic hats on a little bit more squarely. Although I think we got into like some narrative theory stuff last episode.
We did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we're going to be even okay, also still fun. This is still fun, even if it's academic.
I appreciate it. She's like, it's not going to be boring. It's still fun. It's still fun. We're going to try to be like Hit the Spot, the show itself. There was a lot of like, educational things that were happening, but it was still fun.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit more about how Hit the Spot balances education and fantasy and how it centers female pleasure. So, how does it balance education with fantasy, Ayani?
Oh, that is a great question. So, one of the things that really stood out to me with Hit the Spot is like it does not pull the punches with the sex scenes, right? Like
Mhm.
you don't see anyone's downstairs bits. I don't know why I'm being coy, but you don't see their downstairs bits, right? So it's not hardcore pornography, but it definitely I feel like falls into like the softcore category, like the kind of thing you would
Mhm.
see on Skinamax. If you stayed up too late one night or trying to like look through the fuzzy stuff in the cable. I'm dating myself right now. I'm old. We used to try to find porn on television when we were kids. Anyhow, so like we often joke, right, when we talk about different shows that we imagine that people like have had sex or have been in relationships or like they close the door when the exciting stuff comes. Like I think
Mhm.
a good example would be in Business Proposal, which I think had a lot of fun, sexy scenes in it, but it
Mhm.
didn't like they cut, right? You can see people starting to take off clothes, but then they would
Oh, yeah,
cut
like
to the next
they
morning.
make out, but most of the making out you see is like fully clothes on. She's wearing like a long sleeve shirt and like a maxi skirt. Like it
Yeah.
is very
Yeah.
covered up.
Well, I mean, the second male lead took his shirt off. I remember that very well.
Oh yeah,
But
men can take their shirts off,
right, but for
but
women it
not
can be a
women.
little. But with Hit the Spot, like we're not there's none of that. People are naked. People are taking their clothes off. People are fucking. Like it's very clear what is happening. There is no kind of like need to imagine.
Mhm.
The one thing I did think was interesting, and Kern put LOL next to this in the outline, or maybe I did. I don't know. But whose nipples we get to see in these kinds of sequences. So like there are a lot of, as we explained in the first episode, there are people who call in to the podcast or who share their stories with Mina and Hijay's podcast. And those stories are then acted out by different actors, right?
Mhm.
And the actors in those sequences, their contracts might be different or what have you, but oftentimes you will get everybody's nipples
Mhm.
in the course of the sexy times, right?
Mhm.
But that's not.
Especially the one like who had sex like in the office. That was
Oh
like up
yes.
against the wind. Like that
Oh
was.
yes.
We'll talk more about like
We'll come
the
back to that in a
gays,
second.
but
Yeah. But there was a lot of nipples everywhere. But for our two,
hashtag a lot of nipples everywhere.
I mean, hey, if that's how y'all want to share the show, go for it. But for Mina and Hijay, I don't think we ever
Mm-mm.
see them. There's suggested nipples, right? But there was a particular moment that I remember that was very funny for me when Hijay and Inchan are having sex in his car, which again we will come back to in a second because I have some feelings about like how sex works in the show. But they're like fairy lights up to make ambiance, and when I think she's straddling him, right? She's on
Mhm.
top. There is a light beam that is placed over her nipple so that you don't see her nipples while they're
You get
having
like
sex.
you get like a little bit of side boob for like a second, but
Yeah.
like yeah, they're a little bit more coy. I will say with our two lead actresses.
For me, it was just
Yeah.
very funny because it was like her boob was beaming a light out of it. So like it wasn't like I was like, oh, they're not showing me her nips, but more like her titty was glowing. So it's just like, okay, it was a clever way to try to cover her up, right? While still fitting in with what was happening in the scene. But it was still very, very funny to me. So I think we don't necessarily need to have this conversation, but there are of course discourses about whose nipples
Mhm.
are, okay to see, right? And whose nipples need to be covered for decency, kind of a thing. So that's my little moment about nips. Um, but something that I thought would be important to talk about in thinking about Hit the Spot is kind of like the fantasy of sex
Mhm.
that we're getting in the show. So, something that Andrew and I often joke about, Andrew, for those of you who don't know, I feel like we bring him up all the time, but Andrew's my spouse. Something that we joke about all the time is something we call quote unquote porn world. And when I texted Corinne porn world, she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? So, what we say porn world, what we mean is kind of the things that happen in pornography that either are not acceptable in normal life, don't normally happen, but kind of exist in the realm of the fantastic. So, like the
Mhm.
example I gave to Corinne is like when the pizza man comes to your door, your first reaction is not going to be like, yeah, I'm going to pay for this pizza with bone in. Like, that's not how how transactions work in, for the most part, you know, in our society.
Mhm.
However, in porn world, it's perfectly okay to be like, I've run out of money. Do you want to suck on my titties instead for this pizza? Like in porn world, that makes perfect sense. Corinne is making faces at me, but I'm using this like as an
Yeah.
example, right? So watching Hit the Spot, there were some things to me that felt like they were pulling on that sort of porn world aesthetic, that it was like,
Mhm.
this is not necessarily what, not that people don't do sexy things. Like there's a line that I'm trying to travel here, but things that are kind of like they're doing over the top things for the purpose of titillation, for the
Mhm.
purpose of it being like sexy, for it being titillating for the audience.
Yeah, especially having, like, sex scenes that were more, like, public or semi-public, I
Mhm.
think,
Mhm. And
in
again, not that
particular.
people don't do this stuff. People do have sex in public, but like the two for me that made me go porn world was one, Mina and EJ go to the gym and they're like working out, they're trying to do their best, and after they leave their like the locker room where they get dressed, they see two people having sex in the locker room,
Like, loudly.
and then they proceed to watch so that we as the audience can watch
Yeah.
for like a good 30 seconds. Like this was not a short sequence, right? And they're
Uh-huh.
like talking to each other while these people are having sex less than 5 feet away,
Yeah.
which is not, that's fantasy, right? And it's
Uh-huh.
fantasy that is purposely putting sex on display for us in the audience. It was very funny. I think I texted you about that too. I was like, what? Um, and then the other one was the one that you mentioned, the two people who hate each other at work, but then have sex all over their
The way,
office.
because I was paying more attention to this the second time I watched the show, the way that they, like, start the way that it happens is that he, like the man has put alcohol into his drink while they're in the office, and she, like, takes it, but then she, like he's, like, trying to take it back, and then she spills it, and it's like she's poured liquid all over, like, her titties in her white
In
in her
her white
white blouse,
blouse.
and then they, like, look at each other, and then they just, like, start making out.
They
And
had
just,
sex
like,
on the
the way that it, like the way that she pours the drink, like, over her chest is like, "Really, girl?
you
Okay."
know, they have sex on the copy machine. They have the sex in their boss's office, it looked like. They have sex smeared up against the window for everyone to see, which, yeah, I'll say this out loud. That's fine. That's something I've read in like a porn comic before. I do research, so it's totally fine for me to say this on the air. But that literal thing is a thing that I have seen before. So my brain was like, porn world. So I think it's really interesting how this series that is not, I mean, it's softcore, sure, but like its purpose isn't only titillation, is using
Mhm.
some of kind of like, I don't know, the escapism of pornography
Well, and
in putting its show
so
together.
yeah, so building on that a little bit, I also think thinking about that again, the way that the show is balancing education with fantasy with, like, female pleasure, I guess. Like,
Mhm,
one of the
mhm, mhm.
episodes they do, I think it's the episode about female masturbation, maybe, they, like, ask, like they, like, specifically say that, like, a lot of porn is made with, like, the male gaze in mind, and I
Mhm.
think there are ways in which, like so, like, with the office sex, like, a man who is, like, a misogynist at the office is not gonna be like, "Yes, I will go down on you, person that
Oh,
I
yes,
hate."
he went down on her in the
Like
coffee machine, right?
yeah. So, I think just the way that it was, like, centering female pleasure, it's like, this is a fantasy, and also a nightmare, because the reason she's writing into the podcast is that she's like, "I have to see this man at work. I have regrets about this happening."
Yeah,
But,
and
like, the sex
also
scene itself is very sexy, and, like, she has a good time, I will say.
yeah. Oh, for sure, until she realizes that, the office has cameras. Um, but kind of picking up on that, the thing and this is part of the reason why we're thinking of having a conversation separately from this about the gaze, right? About female gaze, male gaze. I'm putting quotes around all these
Mhm.
terms, right? But about what those terms mean, um, is because I do think thinking about how what the camera is focusing on in these sequences is very important in thinking about who the show is targeted to. So,
Mhm.
something that happens a lot in porn, because porn is often, not always, right? But is often targeted towards men who are interested in women, is the man is not really a factor, right? It doesn't I actually was watching the Truth or Drink YouTube series in which they have people like have conversations over liquor and they ask them questions. And there was a couple, it was people who were married to porn stars that were the people
Oh,
having the
interesting.
conversation. Yeah. And there was one couple that they were both porn stars. But one guy was talking to his wife and she was talking about like, "Oh, I should have known he was a porn star. Just look at him. He's hot. He's gorgeous." And the guy was like, "It doesn't matter if I'm hot. That's not what they care about when they're shooting me in these scenes. What matters is if I can stay hard for a long time." Right? Um so, but how a dude looks does not necessarily matter because the point is to kind of use him as a surrogate for the person that is watching the film or watching the shoot. But what I found that was interesting with Hit the Spot is that everyone was kind of an active participant to the camera, right? It wasn't
Mhm.
just like, "Oh, we're only looking at her face because whoever's watching is pretending that they're the man in the sequence." We would get the ladies' experience, we would get or reactions, we would get dudes' reactions, we would look at both of their
Mhm.
bodies. So everyone was kind of on display as a holistic kind of sexual experience, which I thought was really interesting and was really engaging. That's kind of why I think I mentioned this in our previous episode, but like everyone is an active participant. No one
Yeah.
like when we talk about the gaze, right? The gaze thinks of, and I'm putting quotes around this because this is a very quick gloss, but as the person who is looking as the active participant and the person who is being gazed at as the passive participant. But I think for me, in this sense, everyone is active and involved in the situation. There's no one that is just being gazed at, even though we are looking as the audience, right?
Mhm.
Everyone is being looked over. But we can get more
Well,
into that in another conversation at another time.
yeah, but I guess also thinking about the agency of the people having sex, it
Mhm,
just like
mhm.
seemed like in watching these sequences, once we get past like the opening where it's like clearly supposed to be bad sex, where it's like, oh, like both each party involved cares about the other person having a good
Mhm.
time.
Mhm. Mhm. And
Which
when you
just
say
like,
the opening sequence, you don't mean the porn, you mean the
oh yeah,
sad lady
yeah, I mean the lady who was like phoning it in.
for years. Ugh.
Yeah. But so we have these I don't so these sex scenes are like have an element of fantasy to them,
Mhm.
but also are centering or at least making female pleasure equivalent and equally important to male
Yes.
pleasure.
Yeah, everybody's pleasure is important in each of these
Mhm.
sequences,
But then
in
thinking
the sex
about
scenes.
but then thinking about the way education is working, I think it's very interesting
Mm.
because we have these scenes meant to be pleasurable to watch with like the meta narrative of like the podcast where they'll then say stuff like, well, yeah, and like don't forget to pee after sex or you'll get a bladder infection. And like don't forget, like you should use birth control, like you should use a condom because who can have a good time if they're worried about getting an STD or getting pregnant? And it's not just like implied, it is like stated.
Right. And then staged. There are multiple moments of people,
Mhm.
like, getting condoms out or, like,
Mhm.
Hee when she thinks she has a raucous drunken night, it's just assumed that she's gonna go get plan B, right? It's not like we have to have a whole, "Oh, should I get contraceptive? Da 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 da
Oh,
da."
yeah, like, Mina takes her to the doctor to get and there is, like and I
To the
guess this is maybe
proctologist.
because it's the weekend and Mina, like and this seemed to me like a, like, educational for Korean women thing, like, any doctor can prescribe you Plan B.
Mhm,
Like,
mhm,
it was very much like, "You can go to whatever doctor is open, this is the one that it was open on the weekend, so we went, this is the closest one, time is of the essence, this is happening."
mhm, mhm, mhm.
And it wasn't, like, melodramatic about it.
No, mm-mm, mm-mm.
It
It's
was
to
very,
the
like,
point.
practical.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm, mhm. So, I think you're right, there's this kind of, like, interweaving of these more titillating moments with these kind of more educational ones.
Mhm.
Um, I know a place for me that worked particularly well was the sex shop, which
Mhm.
I do not remember the exact name
I
of, but
think
it's
it's,
kind of
like, Peace,
punctuated
Love,
like
and Sex or something.
yeah, with periods in between, so it's kind of punctuated like our show, which is kind of fun. But I think showcasing a sex positive, kind of not dingy, but not like a stereotypical sex shop in a
Yeah,
show like
there was
this
no
was
shame
excellent.
involved. It
None.
was very much, like, well lit and clean, and, like, the shopkeepers were, like, very helpful, and,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
yeah, it was a very much like, "Here, this is what this is good for. This is what this is good for. Oh, you want
Yeah.
this? I can help you find this product." Also, like, I wondered if some of that was product placement of, like, vibrators, which
Oh,
is
it might have been.
amazing.
It might have been. It might have been because they talked about, like, names and titles and things like that. And I will say, this is an area of knowledge that I don't have. I don't know what the sex shop scene is like in Korea. Like, I have no
Mhm.
idea. But I do know that there are shops in the US that try to, like, really show that they are sex positive, that they're good spaces for queer people, that they're good spaces for women, you know? So, I really kind of appreciated that kind of representation in the show.
Mhm.
And like you were saying that there's no shame attached. There might be people might need to get over their initial kind of like embarrassment or giggles of being there, but
Mhm.
I think everyone in the space is there to make it as welcoming and as helpful as possible. And then we also
Mhm.
get that great scene where Hee buys a literal bag full.
I don't have that kind of money, like, "Oh my god,
Those
girl."
things are not cheap.
I wonder if she I hope she got a write-off from work because she coulda said it was research.
That is so smart. Oh my goodness. Um, oh god, yeah. I honestly, the thing that I worried about is when they all dropped on the floor because they weren't in boxes, like, how did she clean them afterwards?
They
They
did
didn't do
show
that in
her
the show.
cleaning them. They showed her cleaning
Yes.
them. Not all of them, but she did clean one before she used it.
Yes, yes, which is also thinking of educational, it's very important actually to clean your sex toys. They didn't say that explicitly, it's not like Mina's ever
Mhm.
like, "And now we're washing big boy." You know what I mean? But that's like that's an important part of that kind of maintenance. So yeah, that's one of those moments. Again, thinking about putting education into it, like even in the moments where it's, no one's saying anything, they're kind of like, "Oh, this is how you do this kind of thing that you might not know how to do."
Mhm. So, shifting the conversation a little bit, but still within the same sort of umbrella, I wanna think a little bit about how consent is working in the drama.
Yes, please.
So it again, it has that kind of thing, and I'm interested to see, like, how this worked for you, where, like, in one of the episodes of the podcast, they talk about how, like, communication is important, like, not just,
Mm.
like, as you start, but, like, as you keep going, then, like, you should have, like,
Mhm.
regular check-ins and, like, make eye
Mhm.
contact, and that it's, like, an active thing with 2 participants who
Mhm.
should, like,
Mhm.
be in communication. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of, like I don't think this is as much of a concern anymore, but especially when affirmative consent became, like, really big on the scene of people being like, "But, like, that's not sexy." To,
Mm.
like, ask
Mhm.
someone
Mhm. Mhm.
before you kiss them or whatever. And I was interested to see what you thought of how the show talked about consent
Hmm.
versus how they depicted consent working in the various sex scenes, especially with Mina and Hee.
Interesting. So, Well, the one thing I'll say is I thought it was really nice that Inchan, our psychologist, was the
Mhm.
one who was having a lot of this major conversation about consent. The fact that
Mhm.
it was coming from a man, I think, is important, and that he was kind of not drawing lines in the sand, but like was being very clear that this is not just an issue for one group of people, that this is an
Mhm.
issue for everybody that is
Everyone.
engaging in sexual practices. So I thought that that was really, really good. And I was concerned at first.
Mhm.
I think and I'm repeating myself, but like when they had that drunken night, that they had actually had sex because EJ had had a dream about it and that was presented to us as real.
Mhm.
Cause that to me, I was like, oh, that flies in the face of all of this conversation about like
Mhm.
consent. Cause if you're both that plastered, and I'm not talking like one beer, they were like whiskey and soju glasses and glasses and glasses and glasses full in, you know.
Mhm.
Like that's not a situation where anyone can like really consent. But then it turns out that
Mhm.
wasn't the case, so I felt better. I don't know. I felt like one of the things that I really liked is the scenes were communicative. I feel like people were
Mhm.
talking, but they were also, and you and I have had conversations about this before, though I'm not quite sure on the pod, but there was a lot of use of like body language that
Mhm.
is not necessarily affirmative consent, but also being able to tell if somebody's into something or not.
Yeah, so I wanna I do wanna distinguish between affirmative consent and specifically verbal affirmative
Yes,
consent,
yes, please do that. Please do
because
that.
with the body language, I think that still would potentially fall under the umbrella of affirmative consent where, like,
Mm,
someone is into it, but, like, something that I think of a lot about in my research and that I'm kind of interested in is that, like, the sort of gold standard of consent that is presented in, like, a lot of Title IX trainings and things like that is verbal affirmative consent, and while that is great in theory, it is perhaps less realistic in practice. Uh,
mhm, mhm.
and I think it's also important to think about that the group of people initially pushing verbal affirmative consent was like college legal departments. So like
That's interesting.
it would be great to have like a verbal contract for things you agreed to do, but like that's not really how life works. And that I
Mhm.
think it is both unrealistic and like potentially even ableist to say that people can't communicate through body language, and I think you still can't assume that you understand someone's body language, particularly if you don't have an established relationship with that
Right.
person,
Mhm.
and, like, when in doubt, use your words. I'm not saying, like, don't do that, but, like, I think the show was it used a combination of, like, verbally
Yeah.
asking, like, "Is this
Mhm.
okay?" Like, "Should we keep going?" With, like, body language of, like, the people being into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And reciprocating, I guess, and that's part
Yes.
of both people
Yes.
being active is, like, it wasn't
Right.
just one it sex wasn't just, like, happening to a person. They were
Right.
both active
Absolutely.
participants.
Absolutely. And I think also because so much of the conversation was about in the first 4 episodes was about people faking it, right? People
Mhm.
pretending to have orgasms or pretending to have a good time, that there was that kind of having this focus on different kinds of affirmative consent,
Mhm.
kind of played off of that well. Like, how do you show someone that you're really into it? Or how do you read the signals that someone is having a really good time? But also, how do you react when someone says, "Hey, I'm actually not having a good time?"
Mhm.
Because that's also part of the conversation is being able to be like, "I actually don't wanna do this anymore. We're stopping," you
Mhm.
know? So so I thought it was well done, but I mean, I guess I'm curious if there were things that you would critique as somebody who studies consent, especially since now you've watched it through 2 times. I mean, clearly the people having sex in the gym did not consent to being watched by Mina
Yeah.
and Hije, right? But this is one of those moments where I think this is why I think kind of thinking about the fantasy elements is
Mhm.
important. Because, well, let me ask a question, right? Do we feel like there are moments where the show was more obviously fantasy and then pulled back into being more realistic?
It was more realistic about the communication in the sex scenes between, like, Hee and Inchan and then Mina and Woo-jae,
Mhm.
but I do like the think the fantasy of, like, the in the back of the car scene was, like that was very much fantasy, but I think the way that they were communicating with each other was realistic.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was so fantasy because Ain't nobody stretching out like that in the
Oh,
back of a
yeah.
RAV4.
I was, like, watching it, I was fully like, "They did not film this in the back of a car.
No,
There's
they
no way."
didn't. They
They
didn't.
filmed it in, like, a black room. Anyway, so that had an element of fantasy to it, but the sex
Many
itself
elements of fantasy.
yeah, but the sex itself didn't seem, like, wildly over the top the way it did to me with, like, the office sex that woman
Mm.
had.
Mhm.
And that was a situation where I was like, "Well, like" okay, so this show didn't really get into sexual assaults at all, which I'm totally fine with. And I think it is okay to draw a distinction between sexual assault and sex that you maybe regret.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And you can consent to something and regret it later, and that doesn't necessarily make it if your consent was legitimate, then
Right, which is important.
yeah,
Mhm.
if your consent was legitimate, you can be like, "Oh, well, like, I wish I didn't do that, but I did, and okay,
And I'll
moving
never
on."
do it again.
Yeah. So I guess what I will say there is that I don't think the show got too much into that realm of thinking about consent.
Mhm, mhm.
The sex scenes that felt more like they were in porn world, like especially the office sex, felt more to me where they were like, I don't know about all that. Oh, also something, I don't know if this is just me, but
Mm.
one thing where I was like, I don't know how I feel about this is their podcast producer boss who like is like very easily stimulated, I think, when like in his ears or one of his erogenous zones. When he
Mm.
like went to like the barber and was like getting off on like
Getting
being shaved, I was like, I don't like that because someone who like you did not have an agreement with your barber to like get off on him doing his like job. I didn't like that. I don't know
Yeah.
if that was just me.
Let's actually talk about their producer a little bit,
Mhm.
because I won't say I had mixed feelings about well, here's the thing, right? I think there's a difference between going somewhere and being like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get off on this person. They don't know I'm getting off," and being somewhere and being accidentally aroused, right?
Okay,
Because that
I think
happens.
that's a fair distinction to draw.
Because I think what was happening with him is that there were 2 instances where he was accidentally aroused, and then he was like, "Oh, no, this is a thing that happens. What do I do?"
Mhm.
Because what the advice was, if I remember correctly, is like, there's no way to really make yourself less sensitive, and it's also interesting because this Inchan was the one who was acting as Hije's co-host in that episode. Mina had just had
Mhm.
her hemorrhoid surgery, so she was in
Poor
recovery.
Mina.
Yeah. And what he said is that there are not really ways to make yourself less sensitive
Except
to things
age.
like that, except getting older, which I was like, "Ugh, attacks." Um, so it didn't seem like they were shaming him in those kind of
Mhm.
circumstances, but I also was kind of like, "Well, yeah, if you know this is something that happens to you, then what do you do? Do you not put yourself in those circumstances? Do you have to be like, "Hey, just so you know, don't touch my ears?'" It's a little too exciting for me. Like, well, how do you navigate that when it's like a part of your body that's just out there in the world? You know what I mean? And also that man was
Mhm.
whispering in his ear kind of close after he cut
Yeah.
his beard. He was like,
That's fair.
"I'm all done now." And I was like, "Oh, no one gives me that service when I get my hair done." Like,
Well, neither would I wish them
yeah, no,
to.
don't whisper in my ear, hairdresser, please. Um, so yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it felt like he was going to the barber shop because he knew he could get off by someone touching his ears. I think he was like, "I'm getting my beard and my head shaved. Oh no, he's touching my ears slowly and sensually. Oh dear." You know?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
but I do want to say, well, let me ask another question here because their producer is the one person it feels like in the cast that is being deliberately coded as queer.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually, like, have a boyfriend, but he's
They don't
he's
say
coded.
he has a boyfriend, but
Right, right. We don't know. He might have a happy boyfriend. But he's coded as queer throughout the show.
mhm.
And he's a funny character. But the one thing about that sequence that I was kinda like, is it felt like well, I don't know, and this is why I'm asking. Do we feel like his call into the show was played more like a joke than anyone else's?
So I don't think it's played as a joke more. I think it is played a little bit jokingly, but like I don't think it's necessarily more jokey than like the I don't know, I'll call her an assistant producer, but,
Mhm,
like, when
mhm.
she writes in to say, like, "Oh, like, I'm 28 and I don't really have a sex drive anymore. Like, I don't really I used to, like, like, want sex, and, like, right now I
Mhm.
don't." And I think it's played for a joke there where it looks like she might be using a vibrator, but instead she's, like, using, like, a muscle massager, like, on her calf muscle and is,
But
like,
also,
getting more pleasure from that.
can I say though, when she whipped out that muscle massager, I was like, "Oh, yeah, actually, could I have one of those? My back hurts." Like, that'd be really nice.
Side note, I actually got one of those for Christmas.
Are you serious? Is it lovely?
Yeah.
Do you love
Oh,
it?
it's been so great on, like, I have back problems, and it's been great.
Oh, girl, drop the link. We'll drop the link in the show notes. 'Cause
I
I
know. So
think I need
I think
one.
that's played as joking. She is played as jokingly as, like, the chief producer of their show.
Okay, okay. Because that was one thing I was just thinking about when we were going through the outline is, like, is the queer character more played for jokes than anyone else? However, I think you're right. I think they're kind of like, what is it, the Banana Man? They're the Banana Man tag team, right? That
Mhm.
they're always filled with antics
I
in a
will
way.
say so
Oh,
I
go ahead.
agree, but I will also say that I do think we should acknowledge that the show is still very heteronormative. As
Oh,
much
for
as it, like,
yes.
centers I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I do think we should definitely say that is what is happening in this show.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, he is the one man that calls into Hit the
Mhm.
Spot. Fanta Oh, yeah, Fanta G Spot is the name of their show. I don't know if we ever said that. We were just like, "That's the name of the show." It's also the
Yeah.
name of their podcast. So, Imma ask one more consent question, and then we can keep it moving. But do you feel like they made consent sexy?
Yeah, I'll say yeah. I mean, I think that, like, both Hee and Mina's sex scenes were, like, pretty sexy, and,
Mm.
like, especially with, like, Mina's insistence upon, like, a background check and a checkup,
Oh, that did
like,
it for you? The background check?
look, I mean, okay, I've heard of people, like, when they meet someone on a dating app being like, "I insist upon, like, you getting checked for STDs," but that's
Mhm,
still, like,
mhm.
outside the norm, but, like,
Mm,
I don't think it I don't know, I don't think it should be. So, like ranging from that to, like, the negotiations within, like, the sex scenes themselves, I was largely cool with how they were portraying consent and making it sexy.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think it's interesting, like, with Mina and Woojae, because
Mhm.
they both were like, "Yes, background checks. Yes, give me your
Well, yeah,
STD
well, it's like
report."
just because you have casual sex doesn't mean it has to be unsafe.
Right, and I think in a way they were both playing that for laughs, but also being like, "But no, this is absolutely legitimate." Because when people would there was a sequence with Woojae where the girl was like, "I didn't bring my report," but, like, she opened up her legs, and I think we didn't see anything, but I think the suggestion was she didn't have any underwear on, and he was
Mhm.
like, "That's nice, you can go though, because
Mhm.
you don't have your STD report."
Well, like,
And that's
even with Mina and Woojae, like, because they can't have sex, like, after she's had surgery, like, he offers to give her, like, updated paperwork when they, like, get together again.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
it's very much, like, a continued thing, not just, like, a
mm,
one-time deal, since
mhm,
they're not at
mhm.
that point in, like, a committed monogamous relationship.
Right, right. Cool. All right, so we'll give the seal of sexy consent to Hit the Spot. I will deem it so. You actually have a note here before we scoot back to centering female pleasure because I think we started talking about it a little bit,
Mhm.
but there might be something else we want to kind of touch on. Something that you said that I think is interesting is that our female leads feel more real to you than the male leads do. And I think you've kind of peppered that a little bit throughout the conversation. But do you want to lean on that a little bit? Not to make you do all the talking, but I'm curious what you mean by that.
Well, I did put it in the outline, so I guess I will own it. So both Hee and Mina felt like I mean, they're still obviously fictional characters, but they felt like people I could know. And, like, I know people,
Mm,
like, who that has been the case for, or,
mm,
like, their experiences and their perspective on, like, sex and romance and, like, dating felt
mm,
very realistic and developed to me.
mm,
And Inchan and Woojae, and maybe here they felt like rom-com male leads to me, or, like,
mm,
Inchan was
mhm,
great. He was this awesome, informed sex psychologist who, like, respected Hee and, like, wanted to, like, get to know her and, like, fell in love with her, and, like, he just I don't know. That just doesn't seem real to me. I don't know, man.
That's not fair. Kind, caring people exist, Corinne.
Yeah, but are they men?
Yes, yes, kind, caring men exist. But no, but I will say I do get what you mean, that they feel more like fantasy men, and I wonder if
Mhm.
that's in part, well, the 2 reasons I'm gonna give, you might disagree with, but one, and we talked a little bit about this, but we get Mina and Hije's internal monologue in a way
Yeah.
that we don't get that for our 2 male leads.
Okay, we do
Um
get it for a minute from Incheon. 'Cause I
Oh,
was, like,
yes.
clocking that on my second
Yes.
watch through because you had pointed and we get Hije's inner monologue the most.
The most. Okay, you're right. We do get it for just like a hot second. But that makes a difference, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't spend the same amount of screen time with them,
Mhm.
and we don't spend a lot of like bestie wind down time with them,
Mhm.
because with Mina and Hije we get to see them not only at work but at home, healing from surgery. We get to see breakups, we get to
Yeah, we
see
know more about their
flashbacks.
history.
Yeah, so they feel more like fleshed out people. So they're just on screen less, and it feels like to me Woo-jae and Inchan served a purpose, right?
Mhm.
They were there for a reason, whereas Mina and Hee felt more like they were 2 people just living their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, where, like, Incheon and Woo-jae were, like they weren't fully plot devices, that's, I think, a little bit too reductive,
Oh, yeah,
but,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
that was their narrative purpose there, and
Mhm.
especially I think also Incheon to me felt a little bit more developed than Woo-jae, like,
Yes, I
Woo-jae
agree.
especially, "Oh, this man," where we had set up expectations of being, like, sex partners, as soon as I feel like I maybe want a relationship is like, "Oh, yes, me too."
Perhaps I would also like to try this, so yeah, I get that. I definitely get that. I think that might be just a function of the fact that it was a shorter show,
Mhm.
but also the things that the show chose to focus on. Yeah, yeah, I think they're fantasy romance leads in a way. I think I also laughed because like I hope this doesn't sound terrible, but like Mina and Hije both are podcast DJs, but they work in a marketing department for a publishing house, and they both snag doctors. And I was just like, oh, okay. That was a decision, And it's of course worked into the storyline, the reasons that they meet them and stuff like that. But,
Mhm.
and again, not to be like people of certain classes can't marry. That's not what I'm saying. I think there's a certain kind of way that the male leads were constructed to be desirable,
Yeah.
both with and without stubble.
Okay.
Well, no, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm being jokey, but also like he's hot regardless, and I think that's on
Yeah.
purpose. Yeah, you appeal to multiple demographics by being like, yes, he's hot and stubbly half the time, but the other half of the time he's clean shaven and Brazilian waxed. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's on purpose. That's on purpose. So yeah, whew. I had to bring it back to the stubble. That man, he's too attractive for his own good. It's very rude. But do you want to come back to female pleasure at all here? Do you feel like we've covered enough ground with that? Was there anything that jumped out to you that you wanted to talk about some more?
Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot of the ways that female pleasure is just fundamentally at the center of this show. Like,
Mhm.
it is something
Mhm.
that they talk about. It is
Mhm.
something that the female characters get to have. Like,
Mhm.
also just like as a side note, especially since TJ, we find out has like never had an orgasm. Like every time she does, I'm just like very happy for her.
Good for you, girl. Good for you.
Yeah. Like whether she's like by herself or like with Incheon, like get it, girl. Like good for you.
See, this is how we should all be cheering on our female friends. Girl, you come 5 times. Good for you, girl. Good for you. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap us up with the most important question
Oh.
of all the show, of all the questions that I've asked. So have we decided which one of us is Hije and which one of us is Mina? Because it was very easy with Fairy and Devil that I was a grass and you were from the Moon Kingdom.
Yes.
But this feels a lot more difficult.
Okay, so we have like gone back and forth on this
Mhm.
more than we put more time into this than it deserves. But I think I'm gonna come down on ultimately I am more like KJ and you're more like Mina.
Okay. All right. I won't fight you on that. I also found out that the actress that plays Mina and I have the same birthday, so I was kind of like, okay. All right. That doesn't feel wrong, but I do feel like there's so much in both of them that feel realistic and honest to,
Mhm.
various experiences.
So
And also,
I will
she's the
also
redhead.
explain yeah, so, like okay, so yeah, Mina is the redhead, and Ayani is also a redhead. Right now.
Right now.
Right now. But I think that I have more of, like, Hijay's approach to life, kind of, where
Mm.
she's a lot more, like I don't know, I'm on a sex podcast, but also, like, still, like, figuring it out, and, like, I do appreciate, though, and this is where so I am more like Mina, and that I'm more of, like, the deadpan, "Okay, let's dial back and give some
Yes.
context"
Mhm. Mhm.
situation. But, like, the spot then where Ayani is more like Hijay is like,
You gonna put me on blast on our
"Oh,
podcast?
Imma do
Great.
it."
Oh, no.
But Hijay has some, like also acknowledging that Ayani is an old married woman these days. Or I should say a happily married woman these days.
It's like, damn, she's calling my whole out. Old married woman. All right, cool, thanks.
No, but Hijay, once she is liberated from her shitty ex, has some really top tier, we should fuck energy.
No, it's true. It's delightful. Like I was really happy for her embracing that energy in her life, you know?
Oh yeah, I'm like all here for like that is one of the most delightful things is seeing Hijay, who like could not even really talk about sex with her long
Mhm.
term
Mhm.
boyfriend, with
Mhm.
Inchan being able to be like, but like we should do it though.
Yeah.
But like, how about now?
Like, when are we gonna do it? I'll wait for you outside. Like, oh, okay, girl.
Oh, like it's adorable. She's super adorable
It's
about
a powerful
it.
tactic. It's a powerful tactic being able to own the fact, you know?
Well, and
Some
I also do so maybe this is kind of a way to wrap us out. Something that I really like about both Hijay and Mina is that they are both very like attractive women, but I think in
Mm,
different ways.
different ways, yes.
Like Mina
Mhm.
is I think a little bit more like conventionally like sexy, and Hijay brings a lot more
Mm.
of like cute energy to it.
Mm.
And that
Mm.
can be equally attractive and desirable.
Yes. No, I agree. I agree. Alright, well, that's a good way of ending it. The entire cast is hot.
Yeah.
So that's a plus and a reason that you should watch Hit the Spot. Yeah, no, I think that's a good place to wrap up. If we don't have any other final thoughts, I think we both really enjoyed it. We both really love the kinds of things that it can do. And if you still haven't watched it somehow and made it this far in the episode, you should just go do that. Go get Vicky and go watch it.
Yes, definitely worth it.
Leading off of that robust two-part conversation, what are we thinking about doing next time in something that will inevitably become 2 episodes, even though we only pitch it as 1?
So we are going to do an episode on the female gaze.
Ooh.
So we've
What
talked
is it? Why are
well
we talking about it?
we'll
No, go
let you
ahead.
know in that episode, but yeah, we've I think we're interested in talking a little bit more about that, partially building on this show because of
Mhm.
the way that it's kind of become a widely used term in pop culture that I think
Yeah.
has maybe become disconnected from its critical origins.
Yeah.
That
Mhm. I
sounded
think that's
very
a good way.
like academic, but
No, but it's true. It's true. Words have meaning, even though that meaning can evolve and change, and it can be important to have conversations about why we are saying this phrase. Why does the phrase "the female gaze" even exist in the kind of conversations we're having?
but yeah, tune back in to sex love literature to learn more about the female gaze.
We'll teach you some stuff. And then my buddy, podcast hosty friend here also wants to do an episode on the friends to lovers romance trope, which I think would be a lot of fun. I really like that one. I hope we'll also be able to talk enemies to lovers
Oh yeah,
and
that
enemies to friends to lovers. There's a
so
lot
that
of to
there are a lot
lovers.
of degrees here that we
Mhm,
could talk
mhm,
about.
mhm. The to lovers pipeline. That's what we should call it. So that'll be in the docket for us as well.
Yeah, and if there is something that you would like us to do a deep dive on, if I do not bully Ayani into watching something else in the meantime,
That's what's gonna happen.
you can find us on Twitter or Instagram at SexLoveLit and let us know what you want us to watch or read, which we also do sometimes.
Do we?
And well, we will eventually. We can read. If you tell us to read something, we can do it.
Bully us into reading.
But yeah. All right.
Whew.
Thanks for listening.
Yep. We will see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.